Hi there, my name's Simon Levette and I'm the Centre Manager of the ABC Assessment Centre. And today we're going to demonstrate how to bond, tape and position installation board within a cavity, as well as fix full fill insulation. And today I've got with me Ian Mitchell. And before we start, I'm just going to get Ian to say a couple of words about his experience within the construction industry.
Right, thank you, Simon. I bring about 30 years experience to this course. That's 3 years as a brickwork apprentice, moving on to 17 years of site work, and then a site manager's role, and then a contracts manager's. So, as I said before, 30 odd years of construction experience.
Brilliant, thanks Ian. So before diving into the installation procedure, let's first ask ourselves a question. Firstly, what is insulation? And what do we mean by partial fill insulation and full fill insulation? On this first point, it's very, very easy to get stuck in the trap of thinking insulation makes buildings warmer. That's not necessarily the case. Instead, we should think about it as the performance in terms of acoustic, thermal and fire. In other words, well-installed insulation should be effective at keeping an ambient temperature in summer, reducing heat loss in winter, acting as an acoustic or a soundproofing barrier, and also to resist the passage of smoke and flames in the event of a fire. Cavity wall construction gives us the perfect opportunity to install insulation, whether that be in the form of mineral wool slabs or foil face boards restrained to the inner leaf, leaving an air gap, known as full fill insulation and partial fill insulation respectively. Today we're going to install both types on our training frames, which were manufactured by ACS stainless steel and here in college. And to make the difference even clearer between the two different systems, we're going to install partial fill and full fill cavity insulation side to side. This video accompanies the ABC Assessment Centre's short course called Bonding, Taping and Positioning Insulation Board, which goes into a little bit more detail on the different types of insulation board, their limitations, their benefits and their locations of where they're installed. But the first thing we need to do before continuing with the install procedure is to have a look at some health and safety considerations. Okay, so some health and safety considerations to be aware of before fitting any kind of insulation. Firstly, always wear long sleeves, not short sleeves, because mineral wool fibers can get everywhere and it can cause serious skin irritation. Secondly, take extra care when using cutting equipment, for example saws, insulation cutters or retractable knives, and adopt a sturdy cutting position when you're actually going to cut or pierce the insulation board itself. And lastly, make sure your workspace is nice and clean and tidy, as you don't want to leave any hazards that could lead to slips, trips or fall. All of these will be in the RAMs, which you should make a conscious effort to read before carrying out any kind of task. Before we go any further in this video, it's worth pointing out the personal protective equipment or PPE that you must wear when on site, because without wearing this personal protective equipment, you cannot even get to the point where you're doing the installation, similar to that we're doing on the video today. So, what do I mean by PPE? Well, it's a 5-point PPE, and myself and Ian here have the correct 5-point PPE, which consists of hard hat, glasses, high-vis vest, gloves, and steel toe-cap boots. Remember, there are some jobs on site or some tasks that require additional PPE, and information related to these can all be found in the RAMS document. We've moved over to the work area and the section of the training frames where we're going to do the installation video for the bonding, taping and positioning insulation board video. So we've got some foil face insulation, silver jointing tape, retaining clips, cutting equipment like a saw and a retractable knife, level and tape measure, correct wall ties for the cavity width, full fill insulation for a 150mm cavity, and an arc cavity sock. We're going to start this demonstration video by installing partial fill insulation. Seeing as we have to leave a ventilated cavity, there is no direct contact between the insulation board and the back of the brickwork. This, combined with the fact that they are foil-faced insulation boards, means that their performance in terms of acoustic, thermal, and resistance to moisture should be very, very good. However, this is assuming that the insulation boards themselves have been positioned correctly in accordance with the wall ties, they have been butted together tightly, the joints have been sealed with the recommended tape, and also that retaining clips have restrained the insulation boards back to the blockwork using the wall ties in their correct spacings. So let's get on with the install. As you see, Ian has built a blockwork infill panel and has a few courses of brickwork forming a 150mm cavity, as well as the correctly specified wall ties spaced at compliant intervals. If you've watched our video or taken our course on forming cavities and the correct installation of wall ties, you'll know that ties should be at maximum 450mm vertical centres and maximum 900mm horizontal centres, except at corners, openings and reveals, where this should be a maximum of 300mm centres and spaced out as Ian has done here, one on top of the other. Taking this into consideration then, the standard dimensions for foil-faced insulation board are 450mm by 1200mm. And that corresponds quite nicely to our training frames, where we'll have a width of 1200mm and we're going to fit two sets of boards or two rows of boards, one on top of each other for this part of the installation. However, for the uppermost row of insulation, in order to show the top row of insulation boards will consist of two parts. One complete board separated into two different parts that will join together later on. This also avoids us piercing the insulation board too many times to accommodate the wall ties to come through. The resulting two pieces will be 250mm wide and also 950mm wide, creating the total width there for our insulation row. Ian is now pushing the saw through the board and flipping it over where the cut has come through to repeat on the other side. Now the board is cut in the correct position, Ian is offering it up to the wall so it sits nicely on the ties at the height of the existing brickwork and just beneath the row of ties at 450mm higher up. To get the cut for the second row of boards, it's a case of marking a cutting line in the position where the fire barrier on the left-hand side meets the first vertical set of ties. Adopting a sturdy stance and with the material to cut elevated off the floor, Ian is now sawing through the insulation to leave two pieces. Ian is now placing both of these cut pieces into the cavity between the ties 450mm and 900mm from the level of our brickwork, and we are now ready to tape the joins that are nicely and tightly butted up together. As you see, Ian is measuring the length of silver tape he needs for the first join and is peeling back the tape to expose the sticky side, which he is now applying to the join, ensuring that the base of the wall ties are well covered. To tape up the long horizontal join between the boards, Ian is cutting the silver tape into 3 separate lengths and applying as before. Note that the tape is equally distributed on both sides of the join, and he is holding it as taut as possible while applying to limit creasing or folding back of the tape and to avoid leaving any air gaps. Remember the cut we made for the wall tie in the bottom left corner? Well, that location also needs to be taped, and that's what Ian is doing now. One last thing to remember is that the boards must be restrained or fastened back to the inner leaf of blockwork, which is achieved by slotting the red retaining clips over each of the wall ties. Here you can see Ian restraining the boards using these clips. It's worth noting here that we're using plastic discs. However, in this age of changing fire regulations, where being able to show that everything in the cavity has a non-combustible rating is increasingly important, the most modern innovations are made from non-combustible or fire retardant materials only. Ian has now added partial fill insulation to the left area of the training frame cavity wall that we have over here, and this would get signed off in a site environment. It would now be the job of a brickie like Ian to go back onto that scaffolder up to that work area to build up the facing brickwork and bed in the ties that we've used as part of this demonstration. Now this is done, it's time to show you the alternative installation method, which is full fill. In contrast to partial fill, full fill insulation does not have a foil face, it doesn't require jointing tape, and it doesn't require any retaining clips. Therefore, it does exactly what it says on the tin. It fully fills the cavity, and it fits that cavity under compression, and therefore it is ordered onto site in the exact cavity width that you're constructing. As you can see, the width of the section of the training frames between the partial fill insulation we've just installed and the corner return, which we've simulated with the installation of a vertical cavity barrier, is 600mm. This is the space we're going to fill with this second type of insulation, which helpfully comes in slabs of 600mm widths. The first thing to do is to take our slab and measure how much of it we're going to have to cut off to achieve a height of 900mm. Ian is measuring this distance on the slab and marking it across with a marker using a straight edge with a level. Having done that, it's time to take our cutting tool to safely cut along this cut line in an area free from obstructions and a safe distance from other operatives. Now we have made an accurate cut, we can offer the insulation up to the cavity and mark the positions where the wall ties will need to pierce it. Remember, this is more frequent closer to our return, where the ties are at 225mm vertical centres. Ian is now marking the 3 piercing holes and, once done, is taking a sharp tool, in this case a chisel, to punch through the depth of the slab. Once these small holes are made, it's time to drop the insulation into the cavity over the ties we've installed and ensure it's positioned tight up against the blockwork skin. It's important that the ends of the wall ties protrude through the insulation so that they can be tied into the brickwork. From this angle, you can see the two different systems of insulation installed side by side. One partial fill, leaving an air gap, and the other fully filling the cavity. From here on in, it's the job of the bricklayer to build up the external leaf whilst maintaining the required compression as construction advances. As you can see, we've now finished the installation procedure. We've demonstrated how to bond, tape and position partial fill insulation boards, as well as fitting some full fill insulation in that same cavity area, taking into account the correct spacing of wall ties and other things in the cavity, for example, fire barriers and the presence of openings, reveals or corners. Okay, so before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask our professional bricklayer here, Ian, what his top tips would be for this kind of installation.
Thank you, Simon. So straight off, we need to check that the right insulation is provided for this specification. Are the wall ties in the correct position? Are the retaining clips correct for the wall ties? Is the insulation been kept well and stored well so that it's not damp or even damaged? Because we don't want to install any more moisture into the cavity when we need to. Are the wall ties correctly positioned? Because they need to be positioned so we can retain the insulation. But generally we need to check on the method statement to see how we're installing it and what PPE is relevant to this type of job. Otherwise, it's all good. So thank you much.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Very, very useful for anyone watching. And all that's left to say is thank you for watching on behalf of Ian and myself. And I hope you can join us for another instructional video very, very soon.